Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. The control room at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory fell silent as the sound tore through every speaker in the building. It wasn't static. It wasn't interference. It was organic, visceral, and utterly wrong. Lieutenant Commander Nathan Cross felt his entire body vibrate as the shriek continued, a sound that seemed to bypass his ears entirely and resonate directly in his bones. Around him, civilian scientists clutched their heads. Dr. Patricia Freeman, the atmospheric specialist he'd been standing next to, dropped to her knees, blood trickling from her nose. Her fingers clawed at the floor tiles, as if trying to anchor herself against the sound. 17 seconds. That's how long it lasted. 17 seconds that felt like 17 hours, each moment stretching into eternity as the scream wormed its way into Nathan's consciousness. It wasn't just noise, it carried meaning, emotion, something that transcended language. Pain, confusion, betrayal. When the sound finally stopped, Nathan realized his hands were shaking violently. On the monitors surrounding him, Voyager 2's telemetry data scrolled past in cascading lines of green text, but now some of the numbers were wrong, corrupted, flickering between values that made no sense. 4 hours ago, 2.9 billion miles away, something had happened near Neptune. Something that had never been planned, never been authorized by anyone except the men in uniforms, who saw the universe as nothing more than a potential battlefield. What the hell was that? Ed Stone's voice cut through the stunned silence like a knife. The project scientist stood in the doorway, his usually calm demeanor shattered. His grey suit was rumpled, his tie loose, and there were dark circles under his eyes. They'd called him back to JPL at 1:30 in the morning, and he looked every bit as exhausted as Nathan felt. But there was something else in his expression now. Fear. Real, primal fear that Nathan had never seen in the older man's face before. Nathan met Stone's eyes and felt his stomach drop into a cold, dark place. The older man didn't know. Of course he didn't know. The civilian side of the mission had no idea what Nathan had been authorized to do, had no concept of the weapon that had been hidden inside their scientific marvel, disguised as just another instrument among the 11 different sensor packages that made Voyager 2 humanity's ambassador to the outer solar system. Dr. Stone, I need to speak with you privately. Nathan kept his voice level, professional, everything a good military officer should be. Inside, he was screaming louder than the sound that had just torn through the building. Inside, he knew with absolute certainty that he'd just made the worst mistake of his life, that he'd just done something that could never be undone, never be taken back, never be forgiven. It'd been such a simple order. Activate the experimental laser communication system. Send a low-powered pulse toward the anomaly they detected in Neptune's upper atmosphere. Standard procedure for testing reflective debris, for illuminating unknown objects, for determining if something was natural or artificial. Nothing that should have caused this. Nothing that should have produced that sound, that terrible agonized sound that still echoed in Nathan's skull, like a ghost that would never leave. Patricia Freeman was back on her feet, wiping blood from her upper lip with the back of her hand. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated with shock. Commander Cross, what did you do? The question hung in the air, like an accusation, like a judgment, like the beginning of the end of everything. Around them, the night shift team was recovering slowly, returning to their stations with shaking hands and pale faces. But Nathan could see it in their expressions, in the way they looked at him now. They'd all heard it. They'd all felt it. They all knew something had gone terribly, catastrophically wrong. And they were looking at him like he was responsible, like he'd just pulled the trigger on something humanity wasn't ready to face. Conference room, now. Stone's voice left no room for argument, carried the weight of authority earned through decades of scientific achievement and leadership. As Nathan followed the scientist down the corridor, his legs felt weak, unstable. He glanced at his watch. August 25th, 1989, 7:56 in the morning Pacific time. He'd remember this moment for the rest of his life. The moment everything changed. The moment humanity fired the first shot in a war we didn't know we were starting. The moment we announced ourselves to the universe not with words of peace or gestures of goodwill, but with violence against something we didn't understand. To understand what happened on that August morning, you have to go back 12 years. Back to 1977, when two identical spacecraft lifted off from Cape Canaveral on missions that would define a generation of space exploration. Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, names so simple they belied the ambition behind them. A grand tour of the giant planets, taking advantage of a celestial alignment that occurs once every 176 years when the outer planets arrange themselves in a configuration that allows a single spacecraft to visit them all, using gravity assist maneuvers, each planet's mass slingshotting the probe towards the next destination. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus and Neptune. Worlds that had only been distant points of light in telescopes, coloured dots in the eyepieces of astronomers who could only guess at what storms raged across their surfaces or what moons circled in their gravitational embrace. Ed Stone had been project scientist since 1972, 5 years before launch. 5 years to prepare, to coordinate 11 different instrument teams scattered across universities and research institutions around the country to transform ambitious plans and engineering drawings into working spacecraft that could survive the radiation of Jupiter's magnetosphere and the cold of the outer solar system. Nathan had read all the mission briefs, studied the public documentation, memorized the technical specifications. Stone was brilliant, dedicated, and genuinely excited about every discovery the mission produced. The kind of scientist who believed space exploration was about expanding human knowledge, about showing the public what science could achieve when properly funded and intelligently directed, about inspiring the next generation to look up at the stars and wonder what was out there. Nathan's mission had always been different, had always carried a darker purpose beneath the veneer of scientific curiosity. He joined Space Command in 1978, fresh out of the Naval Academy, with a degree in aerospace engineering and a top-secret clearance that opened doors most officers never knew existed. His first assignment had been monitoring Soviet satellite activity, tracking their launches, analysing their orbital parameters, trying to determine which satellites were purely scientific and which carried military payloads. His second assignment had been Voyager, and that was when he'd learned that even NASA's most celebrated missions carried secrets that would never appear in press releases or scientific papers. The spacecraft are more than just cameras and scientific instruments, his commanding officer had explained during the classified briefing at a secure facility in Colorado. They carry experimental technology, communication systems that could revolutionize deep space navigation, propulsion research that might lead to faster travel times, and defensive capabilities that could protect future missions from unknown threats. Defensive. The word had seemed absurd at the time, almost laughable. Who were they defending against in the emptiness of space, in the cold void between worlds where nothing lived, where nothing could live? Now Nathan knew. Now he understood that the men who gave orders were always preparing for the worst, always assuming that anything unknown was potentially hostile, always ready to shoot first and ask questions later. The laser system had been DARPA's idea, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency's contribution to what the public believed was a purely civilian mission. They loved to hide military applications inside scientific endeavours, loved to piggyback on NASA's funding and prestige. The official designation was Advanced Laser Communication Array, designed to test directed energy transmission over vast distances, supposedly a breakthrough in how we might communicate with future deep space missions. The unofficial purpose, the real purpose that only a handful of people knew, was planetary defense research. Could a focused laser beam be used as a weapon in space? Could it disable an incoming asteroid, vaporize a comet, or neutralize some hypothetical alien threat that paranoid military planners imagined lurking in the darkness? Nobody had expected to actually use it. Nobody had thought they'd ever need to activate that particular system. It was supposed to be theoretical, a proof of concept, a checkbox on some Pentagon requisition form. Voyager 2 had been performing flawlessly for 12 years. Jupiter in 1979, revealing the volcanic fury of Io, discovering the first active volcanism beyond Earth. Saturn in 1981, showing the intricate dance of the rings in unprecedented detail, finding new moons and strange spoke patterns in the ring particles. Uranus in 1986, with its bizarre sideways rotation and hidden moons that nobody had suspected existed. Each encounter had produced discoveries that rewrote textbooks, that changed how humanity understood the solar system, that proved we lived in a universe far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had imagined. Neptune was supposed to be the grand finale, the last planet before Voyager 2 headed out into interstellar space, before it became one of humanity's first ambassadors to whatever lay beyond the sun's influence. Nathan had arrived at JPL on August 20th, exactly 12 years after Voyager 2's launch. The facility was buzzing with excitement, the energy palpable. Closest approach would be August 25th at 3:56 in the morning, Universal Time. The spacecraft would pass just 3,080 miles above Neptune's North Pole, closer than any previous planetary flyby, close enough to see details that would be impossible to resolve from greater distances. The images were already coming back even from millions of miles away, each downlink bringing new wonders. Neptune glowed blue in the darkness, methane in its atmosphere absorbing red light and reflecting blue, giving the planet a colour that reminded Nathan of Earth's oceans. Bands of clouds swirled across its surface in patterns driven by winds faster than anything on Earth. The Great Dark Spot, a storm system the size of Earth itself, dominated one hemisphere, winds screaming at over 1,000 miles per hour, the fastest ever measured in the solar system, defying every prediction about how much energy a planet so far from the sun should have available. It was beautiful, it was magnificent, and it should have been enough. But on August 24th at 11:47 at night, the long-range sensors detected something else, something that didn't fit any of the models or predictions, something in Neptune's upper atmosphere that didn't belong, that moved with purpose rather than following the wind patterns, that seemed to be tracking Voyager 2's approach with something that looked disturbingly like intelligence. Nathan had been in the classified section of JPL when the alert came through, a separate room isolated from the main control center, where the military monitoring equipment hummed quietly in climate-controlled racks. Patricia Freeman had noticed the anomaly first on the atmospheric data, flagged it as unusual, and the information had been routed to Nathan's station automatically through protocols established years ago. On his screen, the object appeared as a cluster of sensor readings that made no sense according to any natural phenomenon he'd been trained to recognize. Dense, organic signatures where there should only be hydrogen and helium and methane. Electromagnetic activity concentrated in a small volume, pulsing in patterns that suggested organization rather than chaos. Movement that tracked Voyager's trajectory with precision that couldn't be coincidental, couldn't be explained by atmospheric currents or gravitational effects. At 3 in the morning on August 25th, 7 hours before closest approach, the authorization came through on the secure channel. Admiral Peterson himself had signed off, one of the few officers high enough in the chain of command to authorize weapons use in space. The message was brief, clinical, devoid of any acknowledgement of what they were really doing. Activate the laser, illuminate the target, assess the threat level, return findings immediately. Nathan had hesitated for exactly 10 seconds, his finger hovering over the activation switch, his mind racing through all the possible consequences. Then he'd entered the codes, told himself he was following orders, told himself that the people making these decisions had more information than he did, had better judgment, had thought through all the implications. The laser had cycled up, drawing power from Voyager's dwindling reserves, capacitors charging, mirrors aligning, the system coming online for the first time in 12 years of flight. A tight beam of coherent light, invisible in the vacuum of space, fired towards coordinates in Neptune's thermosphere. Then, nothing but waiting. The signal would take 4 hours to reach its destination, travelling at the speed of light across 2.9 billion miles of void. Voyager 2 reached closest approach, right on schedule at 3:56 Universal Time. The main control room erupted in cheers as the data flooded back in a torrent of information. Perfect images, perfect readings, every instrument functioning flawlessly despite 12 years of exposure to cosmic radiation and micrometeorite impacts. Stone was on live television, explaining the discoveries to a captivated audience, his face animated with genuine joy. This was what the mission was about. This was what humanity could achieve when we reached beyond our world, when we dared to explore the unknown. Nathan sat alone in the classified section, watching the clock, watching the telemetry, waiting for the laser to reach its target and wondering what he'd done. At 7:56 in the morning Pacific time, the laser found its mark. The first indication was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't watching the right instruments. A spike in the electromagnetic readings from Neptune's atmosphere. Temperature fluctuation at the target coordinates. Movement, rapid and erratic. Then the biological sensors screamed, their readings spiking into ranges they'd never been designed to measure. Dense organic matter. Complex molecular structures breaking down. Cellular decay happening at impossible speeds. Death. And then the sound came through, encoded in Voyager's radio signal, transmitted across the solar system at the speed of light, and it was like nothing Nathan had ever heard or ever imagined hearing. It wasn't words, wasn't language, but pure expression of agony, so intense it transcended species, transcended the differences between human and alien. The scream of something vast and ancient, hurt by forces it couldn't comprehend, dying alone in the storms of Neptune while its killer fled into the darkness. When it ended 17 seconds later, Nathan sat in silence staring at his instruments, and he knew with absolute certainty that they'd just made first contact. And they'd done it by killing something's child, by murdering an innocent creature that had probably been curious about the strange object flying through its home, by responding to wonder with violence. The conference room was small, windowless, soundproofed. Ed Stone's face had gone from pale to red as Nathan explained what he'd done, what he'd been ordered to do, what the mission had really been from the beginning. They sat across from each other at a cheap plastic table, the kind of furniture that government facilities ordered in bulk because it was functional and expendable. "You weaponized Voyager." Stone's voice was flat, cold, controlled fury, barely contained beneath a surface of professional calm. "You turned a mission of discovery, a mission of peace, into a military operation. You took everything we've worked for, everything this mission represented, and you corrupted it." "I followed orders," Nathan said, knowing how hollow it sounded. how pathetic, how inadequate as an excuse. It was what everyone said when confronted with their actions, the universal defense of people who didn't want to accept responsibility. That's what they all say. Stone stood abruptly, paced to the window that looked out over the parking lot where dawn was breaking over Pasadena, golden light spilling across the San Gabriel Mountains. Do you understand what you've done? What you might have destroyed? We could have been discovering a new form of life. We could have been witnessing something unprecedented, something that would change everything we understand about biology and intelligence. Instead, you killed it. You killed it because someone in a uniform somewhere decided that anything unknown must be a threat. Something was following our spacecraft, Nathan said, his voice defensive. Something that didn't respond to any of our communication attempts. The decision was made that we needed to know what it was, needed to determine if it posed a danger to the mission or to future missions. The decision was made by people who weren't there. Stone slammed his hand on the table, hard enough to make Nathan flinch. By people who see everything as a potential threat, who can't imagine that the universe might contain wonders instead of dangers. We could have been learning. We could have been making history. Instead, we're murderers. First contact, Commander, and we killed them. That's our legacy. That's what we'll be remembered for if this ever becomes public. Nathan couldn't argue with that. The telemetry had been absolutely clear, had left no room for interpretation. Whatever the laser had hit, it was dead. Biological signatures flatlined completely. Temperature dropped to ambient levels. No movement, no response, no life. But there was something else in the data, something he hadn't told Stone yet. Something that made everything so much worse. The imaging data, Nathan said quietly, pulling up the secure terminal he'd brought to the conference room. From the moment of impact. Have you seen it? Stone's expression shifted from anger to curiosity, despite himself, the scientist in him unable to resist data, even when he was furious. He returned to the table, leaned over Nathan's shoulder as the images loaded. The photos were grainy at first, taken through Neptune's thick atmosphere from millions of miles away, digital artifacts and compression noise making details hard to resolve. But the image stabilization software had worked its magic, clearing away the interference, sharpening edges, revealing what was really there. And there, briefly visible in the methane clouds, was something that should not exist according to everything humanity knew about biology and physics. It was massive, easily the size of a city block, suspended in the storms like a jellyfish in ocean currents. Its form was fluid, constantly shifting, as if its body wasn't fixed in any particular configuration, as if it could reshape itself at will. Membranes that could have been wings or sails caught the thin sunlight filtering down from above, spreading wide to maximize surface area. Throughout its body, what looked like a nervous system pulsed with bioluminescence, blue-green light flowing through branching channels in rhythmic patterns that suggested heartbeat or breath or thought. It was alien, completely other, nothing like any life form that had ever evolved on Earth. And it was beautiful in a way that made Nathan's chest ache. Beautiful in its strangeness, in its impossibility, in the simple fact of its existence. The next frame showed the laser impact, a point of focused light striking the creature's center mass, where the bioluminescent channels converged. The frame after that showed it convulsing, contracting, its membranes folding inward as if trying to protect itself from pain it couldn't escape. The one after that showed it falling, tumbling down through the atmospheric layers, its light dimming, its movement becoming erratic and uncoordinated. The final frame showed only darkness where it had been, the creature gone, dead or dying in the deeper layers of atmosphere, where pressure and temperature would crush and freeze anything that fell that far. "My God," Stone whispered, his anger forgotten in the face of what they were seeing. "It's beautiful. It was beautiful." His hand reached out as if he could touch the image, could somehow reach across the billions of miles and apologize, could undo what had been done. This is what we destroyed. This is what we killed because we were afraid. There could be more, Nathan said, pulling up the atmospheric analysis data. The sensor readings show similar signatures throughout the upper cloud layers. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. This wasn't an isolated creature. It's a species, a population, a civilization maybe. And you just killed one of their young. Stone's voice was hollow now, all the anger drained out of him, replaced by a grief so profound it seemed to age him years in seconds. Look at the size. Look at the development of the bioluminescent system. That's not an adult. That's an adolescent. Maybe a juvenile. You killed a child, Commander. You killed an alien child while its parents watched from somewhere in those clouds. The implications hit Nathan like a physical blow. Drove the air from his lungs, made the room spin around him. He'd been so focused on the threat assessment, on following protocols, on doing his job, that he hadn't considered the broader context, hadn't thought about what this creature was or where it had come from or whether it had family. These beings lived in Neptune's atmosphere, had probably been there for millions of years, floating in the methane storms, feeding on electromagnetic energy, existing in an environment that would kill a human in seconds. They'd evolved there, adapted to conditions humans could barely comprehend, built a life and maybe a culture in a place we considered hostile and barren. And Voyager 2 had just flown through their home and killed one of them, killed a child that had probably been curious about the strange visitor, that had probably approached to investigate rather than threaten. The mission continues, Nathan said, forcing himself to focus on immediate concerns rather than drowning in guilt. Voyager 2 is already past Neptune. In 5 hours, it reaches Triton. We need to monitor the data, need to see if there are any other anomalies, any other signs of life. An alarm cut him off. Not the building evacuation alarm from earlier, but something different, more urgent. A priority alert from the main control room, the kind that only triggered when something completely unexpected happened. Stone was on his feet immediately, Nathan right behind him. They burst through the conference room door and ran down the corridor toward mission control, their footsteps echoing on the tile floor. Scientists and engineers were clustering around the main display screens, their voices rising in confusion and excitement that bordered on hysteria. "What's happening?" Stone pushed through the crowd, using his authority to clear a path to the front. Patricia Freeman turned to him, her face flushed, her eyes wide. "Triton. The imaging data just came through from the flyby approach. Ed, you need to see this right now." The main screen showed Voyager 2's latest photographs of Neptune's largest moon, images transmitted across billions of miles of space, decoded and processed and displayed in false color to highlight geological features. Triton, the frozen world with a retrograde orbit that suggested it had been captured by Neptune's gravity rather than forming in place. The coldest place ever measured in the solar system at negative 391 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold enough that nitrogen existed as ice. Cold enough that the air itself would freeze solid if you could somehow stand on that surface. The surface was unlike anything they'd expected, unlike any moon humanity had observed before. Smooth in some areas as if massive floods of liquid had once flowed there, cratered in others from billions of years of impacts, with strange cantaloupe-like terrain stretching across the southern hemisphere, the surface dimpled and ridged in patterns that suggested tectonic activity or cryovolcanism or something else entirely. But that wasn't what had everyone excited, wasn't what had triggered the alert. There were plumes rising from the surface, dark streaks erupting like geysers, shooting material 5 miles high into Triton's thin atmosphere. The plumes drifted more than 100 miles before dispersing, carried by winds that shouldn't exist on a moon with almost no atmosphere. winds driven by mechanisms nobody had predicted. Active geology, one of the scientists breathed, his voice filled with wonder. On the coldest world in the solar system, it's impossible. There shouldn't be enough heat, enough energy to drive this kind of activity. Nitrogen geysers, Patricia added, studying the spectroscopic data scrolling past on her terminal. The sun heats pockets of nitrogen ice beneath the surface, even at Triton's distance. Pressure builds up over time, and eventually it erupts through weak points in the crust. It's extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary. Nathan stared at the images, and his military training kicked in automatically, showing him things the civilian scientists didn't see, patterns that shouldn't exist if these were natural phenomena. The geysers weren't randomly distributed across Triton's surface. They formed a pattern, a deliberate arrangement, and they were all oriented the same direction, all pointing towards the same region of sky, toward Voyager 2's approach vector, as if they'd been triggered deliberately, as if something on Triton's surface was responding to the spacecraft's arrival. "We need to retask the instruments," Nathan said urgently, pushing forward to the control console. "Full biosignature scan on those plumes, enhanced imaging of the material they're ejecting, spectroscopic analysis of the particle composition. Do it now." "Commander, this is a civilian mission," Patricia said sharply, her expression hardening. "You don't get to give orders here. You don't get to redirect our instruments based on whatever paranoid military agenda you're following." "Just do it!" Nathan didn't have time for protocol, didn't have time to explain or justify or convince. His classified terminal was back in the secure room, but he could see enough on the main displays to know they were in danger, to know that something was happening that threatened not just the mission, but everyone in this building. Those aren't geysers. Those are launch systems. Something is using them to put objects into space. Stone caught the implication immediately, his scientific mind making connections faster than anyone else in the room. "Everyone, step back from the displays. Give the commander access to the imaging controls. Do it now." Nathan took the seat vacated by a confused engineer, his fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. He routed the classified enhancement algorithms through the main system, applied filters that the public mission would never use. Filters designed to detect artificial structures or biological signatures or anything that didn't fit natural patterns. The geysers resolved into sharper focus on the main screen, details emerging from the noise, and there, barely visible in the erupting plumes of nitrogen and ice particles, were objects, small, roughly spherical, with surfaces that seemed to shimmer and change as he watched. The biosignature sensors locked onto them immediately, reporting the same complex organic readings they detected in Neptune's atmosphere. "They're evacuating," Nathan said, the realization hitting him like cold water. Triton isn't their home. It's their nursery, their breeding ground. They've been keeping their young frozen in the ice, and now they're launching them into space, sending them up to Neptune's atmosphere, where the adults are waiting. The implications crystallized in his mind with horrible clarity, each piece of the puzzle falling into place. The creatures in Neptune's atmosphere weren't just random organisms floating in the storms. They were a species, an intelligent species that had figured out how to use planetary bodies as incubators for their offspring. They'd seeded Triton with their young, buried them in the frozen surface where the extreme cold would preserve them until they matured enough to survive the journey to Neptune's storms, and Voyager 2 was about to fly right through their evacuation route, right through the path where hundreds or thousands of these juvenile creatures were being launched into space. Stone saw it too, his face going pale. "How long until Triton closest approach?" 4 hours, 32 minutes, someone called out from one of the navigation consoles. "Can we alter course? Change the trajectory to avoid the plume field?" Stone's voice was steady, but Nathan could hear the desperation underneath. Silence fell over the control room. Everyone knew the answer. Voyager 2's trajectory had been locked in months ago, calculated down to the last decimal place, time to give them the best possible views of Triton's surface. The spacecraft had no fuel for major course corrections, no ability to dodge or weave. It would pass within 25,000 miles of Triton, exactly as planned, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. "Start recording everything," Stone ordered, his voice taking on the tone of command that Nathan recognized, the voice of someone making the best of a bad situation. Every instrument, maximum sensitivity, maximum data rate. Whatever happens next, we need to document it. We need to understand it. Nathan pulled out his secure phone, stepped away from the crowd. He had to report this, had to let command know what they were flying into, had to tell them that the simple reconnaissance mission had turned into something far more complex and dangerous. But as he dialed the number, a terrible thought occurred to him. What if command already knew? What if this had always been part of the plan? Test the laser on Neptune, see what happened, then collect samples as Voyager flew through Triton's geysers. Study the creatures, learn their biology, figure out how to weaponize them or defend against them. It was exactly the kind of thing military intelligence would do, exactly the kind of operation that got hidden inside civilian missions. The phone rang twice before Admiral Peterson answered, his voice crisp and alert despite the early hour. "Cross, status report." "Sir, we have a situation developing rapidly. Triton appears to be a breeding ground for the organisms we encountered at Neptune. They're launching juveniles into space right now, directly into Voyager's flight path. We're going to make contact in less than 5 hours. We're going to fly through a cloud of these things." There was a pause on the line, and Nathan could hear voices in the background, people talking urgently. Then Peterson was back. "Excellent work, Commander. Maintain all recording protocols. Do not, I repeat, do not attempt to alter the spacecraft's course. This is an intelligence gathering opportunity we cannot afford to waste." Nathan's blood went cold, his hand tightening on the phone, hard enough to make the plastic creak. "Sir, if these organisms attach to Voyager, if they contaminate the spacecraft, we could be bringing something back to Earth through the data stream. We could be opening a pathway for them to reach our world. Then we'll have samples for study, Commander. We'll have actual alien biology to examine instead of just sensor readings and photographs. This is exactly what we've been hoping for. Make sure we don't waste it. Peterson out." The line went dead with a click that sounded like a judge's gavel, like a door closing, like the end of any hope that this could be stopped or prevented. Nathan stood frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear. Behind him, the JPL team was frantically preparing for the Triton flyby, coordinating instruments, checking data buffers, arguing about which features to photograph and which experiments to prioritize. They were scientists doing what scientists do, documenting and discovering, pursuing knowledge with single-minded dedication. They had no idea they were being used, had no idea that the mission they'd dedicated years of their lives to had been compromised from the beginning, that they were pawns in a military operation that saw alien life not as a wonder to be studied, but as a resource to be exploited. Stone appeared at Nathan's shoulder, his voice low. "What did they say?" "They want us to proceed as planned. They want to collect samples. Even knowing what we're flying into, even knowing we might be contaminating the spacecraft." Nathan met the older man's eyes and saw his own horror reflected there, especially knowing that. This is what they wanted all along, Ed. This is why they put the laser on Voyager. They were hoping we'd find something out here, hoping we'd make contact. And now that we have, they want to study it, weaponize it, turn it into an advantage over the Soviets or whoever else they think is a threat. Stone closed his eyes for a moment, and Nathan saw him age years in that instant. "Then we're going to document everything, every detail, every piece of data. If they're going to do this, if they're going to turn first contact into a military operation, then at least we'll have a record. At least someone will know the truth. The next 4 hours passed in a blur of preparation and mounting dread. Nathan returned to his classified section, watching the countdown timer tick towards 0 while the civilian team buzzed with excitement around him. This was history in the making, they told each other. Voyager 2 was about to give humanity its first close-up views of Triton, Neptune's mysterious moon. They had no idea what else was waiting, had no idea that history was about to take a dark turn. Patricia Freeman had taken charge of the atmospheric analysis, coordinating with the imaging team to capture as much data as possible during the brief flyby. She moved between stations with confidence, checking readings, adjusting parameters, making sure every instrument was perfectly calibrated. Ed Stone was doing interviews with the press, appearing on television screens around the world, explaining the significance of the geysers, the implications for active geology on frozen worlds. His face was animated, enthusiastic, showing no sign of the fear Nathan knew he felt. He was playing his role, maintaining the fiction that this was purely a scientific endeavor. Nathan sat alone watching the biosignature readings climb steadily as Voyager 2 entered Triton's orbital space. The sensors were going crazy, their readings spiking into ranges they'd never been designed to measure. The objects in the geyser plumes weren't just drifting randomly. Like particles of ice or dust, they were moving with purpose, adjusting their trajectories using methods Nathan couldn't explain, converging on the spacecraft's position like iron filings drawn to a magnet. They knew Voyager was there. They could sense it somehow, could detect the electromagnetic radiation it emitted, or the heat from its electronics, or something else entirely. At 8 o'clock in the evening Pacific time, Voyager 2 passed within 25,000 miles of Triton's frozen surface. The cameras captured stunning images flooding back through the deep space network, digital data converted to pictures that showed cratered plains and smooth volcanic flows, nitrogen geysers erupting in slow motion against the black sky, surface features that would keep scientists busy for years trying to understand their origin. The spectroscopy instruments analyzed the thin atmosphere, detecting nitrogen, methane, and carbon monoxide in ratios that suggested complex chemistry. And then, exactly as Nathan had feared, the external sensors detected multiple impacts on the spacecraft's hull, multiple small contacts on the spacecraft's exterior, timing almost simultaneous. Not debris, not ice particles, not anything natural. Biological matter adhering to the antenna array spreading across the magnetometer boom, attaching to solar panels and instrument mounts. Nathan's screen filled with data scrolling past faster than he could read. Temperature readings spiking as the organisms made contact, then dropping precipitously. Chemical reactions occurring on Voyager's hull. Complex molecular interactions that suggested the organisms weren't just passive passengers. They were growing, feeding on the residual heat from the electronics, spreading like mold across metal surfaces in patterns that suggested coordination, rather than random growth. "We have contamination," Nathan called out, his voice cutting through the celebration in the main control room, like a blade. "Something is attached to Voyager 2, multiple organisms. They're spreading across the spacecraft's exterior." The room fell silent instantly, the celebration dying as if someone had flipped a switch. Stone was at Nathan's side in seconds, leaning over his shoulder to stare at the telemetry data. "What are we looking at? What's happening to our spacecraft?" "The organisms from the geysers," Nathan explained, pointing at the readings. "They've made contact with Voyager, and they're not just attached, they're multiplying, spreading, growing. Look at the temperature sensors." On the screen, a diagram of Voyager 2 showed temperature readings from hundreds of sensors distributed across the spacecraft. The affected areas were cooling rapidly, dropping below the already frigid temperatures of space, approaching absolute zero in some locations. The organisms were drawing heat from the electronics, using it to fuel their growth, feeding on the energy that powered Voyager's instruments. "How long until they reach critical systems?" Stone asked, his voice tight with controlled panic. "How long until we lose the spacecraft?" Nathan ran the calculations quickly, extrapolating growth rates from the data. At current expansion rate, approximately 6 hours until they compromise the primary antenna. After that, we lose communication. The spacecraft becomes silent, lost to us forever. Can we heat the affected areas somehow? Use the instruments to generate thermal radiation, drive them off with warmth? We could try redirecting power, maybe overload some systems to produce heat, but... Nathan trailed off as a new alert appeared on his screen. Red warnings, flashing in the classified data feed. The electromagnetic readings from Voyager's position had just spiked dramatically. A massive energy surge with an origin point somewhere near Triton's orbital space. Something big was moving, accelerating, heading toward Voyager's location at speeds that shouldn't be possible for anything biological. "Something's following us," Patricia said from her station across the room. She'd pulled up the long-range sensor data and it showed exactly what Nathan feared. A large biosignature, far larger than the juveniles in the plumes, moving fast and getting faster, accelerating toward Voyager's position with purpose that couldn't be mistaken for anything but pursuit. It was one of the adult creatures from Neptune, one of the massive beings that lived in the storms, and it was hunting, tracking the spacecraft that had killed one of its kind, following the trail of electromagnetic radiation and heat that Voyager left in its wake. "How long until intercept?" Stone's voice was steady, but Nathan could hear the tension beneath, could hear the fear that everyone felt. 19 minutes at current velocity, less if it continues accelerating." The room erupted in frantic activity, the carefully orchestrated calm of the flyby dissolving into chaos. This was no longer a scientific mission about discovering new worlds and expanding human knowledge. This was a crisis, an emergency, an encounter with something that could destroy everything they worked for. An alien organism was pursuing their spacecraft, and they had no idea what it intended to do, what it was capable of, whether it wanted to communicate, or attack, or something else entirely. Nathan knew with cold certainty what was happening. It was coming for its young, responding to signals that the juvenile organisms were sending out, calls for help or distress or reunion. And it was coming for revenge against the thing that had killed their sibling, coming to destroy or disable or punish the strange visitor that had brought death to their home. "We need to transmit a message," Stone said suddenly, his scientist's mind searching for solutions, even in crisis. "Try to communicate. Let them know we mean no harm, that what happened was a mistake, an accident, born of fear and ignorance." "Ed, we already harmed them," Nathan said, pulling up the laser logs. "We killed one of their children. There's no way to undo that, no words that can make that right. They watched us murder their young, and now they're responding. Then we apologize. We explain it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. We're scientists, not conquerors. We came here to learn, not to destroy. That has to mean something. They're intelligent. They have to be intelligent to coordinate like this, to use Triton as a breeding ground. Intelligence means the capacity for understanding, for forgiveness." Nathan wanted to believe that communication could solve this, that words could bridge the gap between species, between worlds. But he'd seen the military's plan, understood their intentions. They weren't interested in communication or understanding. They wanted samples, data, intelligence on a potential threat, and they'd gotten exactly what they wanted, regardless of the cost. The timer hit 15 minutes until intercept, then 10. The tension in the control room was palpable, people standing frozen at their stations, watching the displays as the biosignature grew closer. Nathan made a decision, the kind of decision that could end his career or worse, but he made it anyway because it was the right thing to do. "I'm activating the laser again." "What? No, absolutely not." Stone grabbed Nathan's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "You can't seriously be considering attacking again. That's what started this. That's what killed their child." "It's not a weapon this time," Nathan said, pulling his arm free gently. "It's a communication tool. Trust me, just watch." His fingers flew across the keyboard, reprogramming the laser's firing sequence, with modifications he'd been thinking about since the first disaster. Instead of a sustained beam designed to illuminate or damage, he programmed short pulses, deliberate rhythmic patterns, the universal language that any intelligent species should recognize. Prime numbers, the building blocks of mathematics that couldn't occur by chance. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. Then the sequence again, faster this time, to show it wasn't random. Then variations, adding and multiplying, and showing relationships that could only come from conscious thought. The laser fired impulses, short bursts of light transmitted towards the approaching creature. Nathan watched his screen intently, looking for any response, any acknowledgement, anything that suggested the message was being received and understood. For 30 seconds, nothing happened except the inexorable approach of the massive biosignature. Then, the creature changed course, not retreating but slowing, its trajectory altering slightly. The electromagnetic signature began to fluctuate in a pattern, and Nathan's analysis software highlighted it immediately. The pattern matched his laser pulses, matched the prime number sequence he'd sent. "It's responding," Patricia breathed, her voice filled with wonder. "My God, it's actually responding. It understood, and it's answering." Nathan continued the sequence, adding complexity, now that he knew communication was possible. Mathematical relationships, expressed in pulses of light, geometric patterns, physical constants like the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. Anything that could demonstrate intelligence without aggression, anything that could show they were trying to talk rather than fight. And the creature kept responding, matching his patterns, adding its own variations, engaging in a conversation that transcended language and biology and the vast gulf of space between them. This was real communication, Nathan realized. This was first contact done right, the way it should have been from the beginning. Using mathematics and patience and the simple desire to understand, rather than weapons and fear and the assumption of hostility. For a few precious minutes, humanity and an alien intelligence were talking to each other, sharing the common ground of logic and pattern recognition. Then the scream came back, and this time it was different. It tore through the data stream like before, but not with pain or anguish. This was communication, information transmitted in a form that bypassed language entirely, that went directly to the brain, that spoke to something deeper than words. Nathan felt it in his bones, in his gut, in the primal part of his brain that understood emotion and meaning without needing translation. Images flooded his mind, not pictures, but pure concepts, pure understanding. He saw the creatures as they truly were, ancient beings that had evolved in Neptune's depths over millions of years, perhaps billions, adapting to an environment humans considered lifeless and hostile. They fed on the planet's electromagnetic field, drew energy from the storms that raged across the surface, lived in the methane clouds where pressure and cold would kill anything from Earth. They were intelligent, social, caring for their young with devotion that transcended species. They had culture, maybe language, definitely consciousness and self-awareness. He saw their life cycle play out in his mind like a documentary compressed into seconds. The adults releasing spores that drifted down through Neptune's atmosphere, falling toward Triton where the cold would preserve them. The juveniles growing slowly in the ice, protected from the storms, developing the complex biology they'd need to survive in Neptune's hostile environment. Then, the geysers, powered by solar heating over years and decades, launching the young back into space when they matured enough to survive the journey. The adults waiting in the upper atmosphere to catch them, to guide them, to welcome them into the storms that would be their home. He saw what happened when Voyager's laser had fired, saw it from the creature's perspective. A juvenile, too curious for its own good, had approached the strange object from the inner solar system, the thing that radiated heat and electromagnetic energy in patterns it had never encountered. It had come close to investigate, to learn, to satisfy the curiosity that was apparently universal among intelligent beings. The laser had struck without warning, without provocation, without any attempt at communication. The juvenile had died in agony, its complex biology torn apart by energy it couldn't process, its last moments broadcast to every member of its species through the electromagnetic bonds they shared. And he saw the response, felt it as if it were his own emotions. Grief, profound and overwhelming, the loss of a child mourned by an entire species. Anger burning and righteous at the senseless violence, at the death of something precious. Confusion, desperate and painful, trying to understand why the visitors from the warm worlds had attacked, what they had done to deserve this violence, whether this was how beings from the inner system always behaved. But underneath the emotion, something else, a question transmitted with the full weight of an ancient intelligence. Will you do it again? Will you continue to kill us? Or can you learn? Can you become better than you were? The vision faded, leaving Nathan gasping for air, his hands shaking on the keyboard. Around him, the JPL team was recovering from their own experiences. Everyone connected to the data stream had felt it, had received the message, had shared in the alien consciousness for those few eternal seconds. People were crying, some openly weeping at the beauty and tragedy of what they'd experienced. Others stood frozen, trying to process what had just happened, trying to integrate an alien perspective into their human minds. They're asking if we're a threat, Stone said, his voice shaking, tears streaming down his face. They want to know if we're going to keep attacking, if we're a danger to them and their children. They're giving us a choice, Nathan. They're giving us a chance to be better. Nathan looked at his screen where the adult creature had stopped its approach, hovering at the edge of the Voyager's sensor range, waiting for an answer, waiting to see if humanity would choose violence or peace, fear or understanding. He pulled up the laser controls again, knowing that whatever he transmitted next would define humanity's relationship with the first alien intelligence we'd ever encountered, would determine whether we could coexist with other minds or whether we were doomed to see everything unknown as an enemy. His hand hovered over the keyboard, trembling with the weight of responsibility. Then, alarms screamed throughout the building. Not from the spacecraft telemetry, but from JPL itself, from the facility's internal security systems. The emergency lighting kicked on, bathing the control room in red light that turned everything the color of blood. Security protocols activated automatically, automated doors slamming shut throughout the facility with metallic thuds that echoed through the corridors. And on every computer screen, the same error message appeared in stark white letters. Containment breach. Biological hazard detected. Facility. Lockdown initiated. Nathan's blood turned to ice as he understood what was happening. The organisms on Voyager 2, the ones that had attached to the spacecraft and were spreading across its surface, they'd been transmitting data back to Earth for the past hour, feeding information through the radio link, sending complex signals that contained more than just telemetry. And something had come through, had used the data stream as a bridge, had downloaded itself through the deep space network and emerged on Earth in a form that could exist in physical reality, information becoming matter, consciousness travelling as radio waves and manifesting in the cold electronics of JPL's computer systems. It was impossible according to everything humanity knew about physics and biology, but it was happening anyway because these beings didn't follow Earth's rules, didn't conform to our understanding of what life could be. Patricia was at the environmental monitors, her face pale, her hands shaking as she read the displays. Temperature in the server room is dropping, negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit and falling. That's impossible. Our heating system should be compensating, should be maintaining normal temperature. The screen died in front of her. Not just hers, but half the monitors in the room went black simultaneously, the power cutting out in sections. And in the darkness on the dead screens, something moved. Something that flowed like liquid across the glass, spreading from terminal to terminal, feeding on the cold and the electricity. "Everyone away from the computers," Stone shouted, his voice cutting through the rising panic. "Get back from the screens right now." The team scattered, backing toward the exits with the instinct of prey animals, sensing a predator. But the security doors had sealed when the contamination alarm triggered, magnetic locks engaging with solid thunks. They were locked in, trapped in the control room with whatever had just manifested from Voyager's data stream with something that shouldn't exist on Earth, that had travelled billions of miles as information, and now wanted their heat, their energy, their lives. Nathan grabbed his radio, tried to call building security. Dead, completely silent, all the communication systems down simultaneously. They were isolated, cut off from help, trapped in the control room with an alien predator that was getting stronger every second. The temperature was dropping rapidly now, Nathan's breath visible in the air, frost forming on the computer screens and spreading across the walls in crystalline patterns. His fingers were going numb, his body starting to shiver involuntarily, and in the corner of the room near the main server array where the processors ran hot and the cooling systems fought a constant battle against waste heat, a dark pool was spreading across the floor like an oil spill. Not liquid, not solid, something in between, something that violated the laws of thermodynamics by existing at all. It moved against gravity, flowing upward along the wall, spreading across the ceiling like ink dropped in water, tendrils reaching out and pulling itself along surfaces that should offer no purchase. "What is it?" someone whispered, their voice thin with terror. "What the hell is that thing?" Nathan knew with absolute certainty. The creatures from Neptune, from Triton, from the frozen outer reaches of the solar system. They existed in extreme cold, in an environment where normal matter behaved in strange ways, where the rules of Earth biology didn't apply. They weren't carbon-based like Earth life, weren't built from the same elements or following the same chemical pathways. They were something else entirely, something that could exist as information and as physical matter simultaneously, something that could travel through data streams and emerge wherever there was cold enough environment and electricity enough to sustain them. And they'd just proven they could reach Earth, could manifest in humanity's computers and buildings, could hunt us in our own territory if they chose to. The entity on the ceiling paused in its spreading, seemed to study the humans below with senses Nathan couldn't imagine. He could feel its attention like a physical weight, alien and vast, analysing them with an intelligence that was completely other. It was deciding what to do, whether to attack or observe, or something else. The moment stretched into eternity, everyone frozen, afraid to move or breathe or draw attention to themselves. Then it moved with speed that defied physics. It dropped from the ceiling like a predator pouncing, flowing across the floor, in ripples that spread too fast to track, heading straight for the nearest person. A young engineer, couldn't have been more than 25 years old, fresh out of graduate school and excited to work on Voyager. He screamed and tried to run, but there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide in the sealed room. The entity touched his leg, and he froze in mid-step, literally froze as ice crystals formed across his skin in spreading fractal patterns. His scream cut off mid-breath as the cold reached his lungs, as his internal temperature dropped below anything compatible with life. He toppled backward like a statue, hit the floor, and shattered like glass dropped on concrete, pieces scattering across the tile in a horror that Nathan's mind refused to process. Chaos erupted instantly. People ran for the doors, pounding on the sealed exits with fists and tools, screaming for help that couldn't hear them. The entity pursued with fluid grace, faster than anything should move, touching each person it reached. Every contact resulted in the same horrifying transformation. Human bodies flash frozen in seconds, crystallizing and breaking apart like they'd been dipped in liquid nitrogen. The temperature kept dropping, the room becoming a freezer, a death trap, a sealed environment where an alien predator hunted and humans died. Nathan grabbed Patricia and Stone, pulled them behind the main console where thick equipment might provide some cover. We need heat. Anything that generates heat. Fire, electricity, anything. The backup power systems, Patricia gasped, her breath coming in short clouds. They're on the other side of the room, near the far wall. If we can overload them, create an electrical fire, we might be able to drive it back. I'll go, Nathan said without hesitation. He didn't wait for argument or discussion. He broke from cover, sprinting across the control room, while the entity pursued others, while people died screaming behind him. The backup power panel was near the far wall, a grey metal box with yellow warning labels that told anyone reading them to stay away, to call a qualified electrician, to never open the panel without proper training. Nathan yanked it open, exposed the circuits inside, thick cables carrying enough current to run half the building. He could hear screaming behind him, the sounds cutting off one by one as the entity moved through the room. How many had died already? 10? 15? 20? The control room had held nearly 40 people when this started, the best and brightest of NASA's team. Scientists who dedicated their lives to exploring the cosmos. Now they were dying because Nathan had followed orders, because he'd fired a laser at something he didn't understand, because humanity's first impulse was always violence. Nathan grabbed two main power lines, ripped them free from their connections with force that sent the electricity arcing through his hands. Sparks flew, bright in the dim, red emergency lighting, and he deliberately crossed the wires, shorting them together, forcing current through pathways never designed to handle this kind of load. The electrical system screamed, circuit breakers tripping in sequence, but Nathan held the wires together with hands that were blistering from the heat and the current, refusing to let go no matter how much it hurt. The temperature in his immediate area started to rise. The backup batteries were overheating, their chemical reactions accelerating, dumping all their stored energy at once, in an uncontrolled discharge. It wouldn't be enough to save everyone. Probably wouldn't be enough to save anyone, but it might give them a chance, might buy them a few more seconds of life. He looked back towards Stone and Patricia. The entity had noticed what he was doing, abandoning its other prey to flow toward him, toward the source of the heat and light and electricity. It moved across the floor like spreading darkness, tendrils reaching out, seeking to touch him, to freeze him like all the others. Nathan held the wires tighter, feeling the current reach his skin, now that the insulation had melted away, feeling his muscles contract involuntarily as electricity coursed through his body. The batteries were glowing now, actual flames beginning to lick across their surfaces, plastic casings melting, chemical fires spreading. The emergency sprinklers would activate soon, but first the heat had to reach the sensors, had to trigger the automated safety systems. The entity reached Nathan, touched his legs, and he felt cold like he'd never imagined. Cold that went beyond physical sensation, beyond the ability of his nervous system to process. It was the cold of deep space, of the void between stars, of places where matter itself behaved differently. His legs went numb instantly, ice forming across his uniform in patterns that looked almost beautiful. Then the batteries exploded with force that threw Nathan backward like a doll. He hit the far wall hard enough to crack plaster, lost his grip on the wires, tasted blood in his mouth, but it was enough. The fire spread rapidly across the backup power station, feeding on cables and insulation and anything combustible, generating heat in waves that pushed back against the terrible cold. The temperature in the room spiked suddenly, dramatically, uncomfortably hot after the freezing minutes before. The entity recoiled as if struck, its form losing cohesion where the flames reached. Where the heat touched it, the entity evaporated like morning fog in sunlight, unable to maintain physical existence when the temperature rose above a certain threshold. It retreated toward the server room, flowing through the ventilation grates, seeking colder environments where it could survive, where it could wait for another opportunity. The sprinklers finally activated, dumping water across the flames in torrents that turned instantly to steam. The fire died, but the damage was done. The backup systems were destroyed, and more importantly, the entity was driven back, contained if not killed. Stone and Patricia reached Nathan, helped him to his feet with hands that shook. His legs were frostburned, painful but still functional, the ice having only begun to spread before the heat drove the entity away. Around them, survivors were emerging from hiding places, from under desks and behind equipment. Nathan counted quickly. 19 people left out of nearly 40, including himself. 21 dead in minutes. 21 people who'd come to work expecting to make history by studying Neptune, who'd never imagined they'd become casualties of first contact. "The doors," Stone said, his voice hoarse. "The security protocols should reset with the backup power destroyed. The magnetic locks should release." He was right. The loss of power had triggered failsafes, and the doors swung open with pneumatic hisses. They could escape the control room now, could get out of this death trap. But where would they go? The entity had come through the data stream, which meant it could manifest anywhere in JPL that had computer systems and sufficient cold. The whole facility was compromised. The entire building a potential hunting ground. Nathan's radio crackled to life suddenly, the military frequency cutting through the static. Admiral Peterson's voice crisp and alert. "Cross, sit rep. We're reading massive power fluctuations at your location. What's your status?" "Sir, we have an incursion," Nathan said, his voice shaking despite his efforts to control it. "The organisms from Voyager have manifested physically inside JPL. They came through the data stream, multiple casualties, at least 21 confirmed dead. We need immediate evacuation and containment protocols." "Negative on the evacuation," Peterson said, and Nathan felt his blood go cold again. "Facility lockdown is in effect. Nobody leaves until we have samples secured. This is an unprecedented opportunity to study these organisms in a controlled environment." Nathan stared at the radio in disbelief, unable to process what he was hearing. "Sir, people are dying. We have civilians trapped with a hostile alien entity. We need to evacuate now." "Those are your orders, Commander. Secure samples of the entity for transport and analysis. Use whatever force necessary. This is a direct order from the highest levels. Peterson out." The radio went silent with a click that sounded like a death sentence. Patricia had heard the exchange, her face transforming from relief at escape to horror at the reality of their situation. "They're not going to let us out. They're treating this as a research opportunity. We're not personnel to be rescued. We're acceptable losses in their experiment." "Then we make them let us out," Stone said, and there was a steel in his voice that Nathan had never heard before. The voice of someone who'd been pushed too far and was done following rules that got people killed. "We get to environmental controls, superheat the entire building, until it's uninhabitable for that thing. Force them to evacuate us by making the facility unusable for their research. Nathan looked at the survivors gathered around them, scientists and engineers who'd followed orders and protocols their entire careers, people who believed in institutions and authority and the chain of command. Now they were looking at him and Stone with eyes that had seen too much death, with expressions that said they were ready to do whatever it took to survive. Environmental control is 3 floors up, Patricia said, pulling up a mental map of the facility. We'll have to go through the main server farm to reach it. That's where the coldest temperatures are in the building, where the cooling systems run constantly to keep the computers from overheating. That's probably where the entity is hiding now. Then we bring the heat with us, Nathan said, grabbing a fire extinguisher from the wall. He checked it quickly, saw it was CO2. Essentially useless as a weapon, but the compressed gas might give them a few seconds of warning if they encountered the entity. Everyone who can move, grab whatever you can use to generate heat or light. Flashlights, lighters, anything that burns or sparks or produces warmth. The group assembled with grim efficiency, moving with the coordination of people who understood their lives depended on working together. They had makeshift weapons, tools turned to desperate purposes, anything that might keep the cold at bay. It wasn't much, probably wouldn't be enough, but it was something, and something was better than waiting to die. Stone led the way to the exit, moving carefully through the door and into the corridor beyond. The hallway was dark, emergency lighting providing only dim red illumination that turned everything the colour of dried blood. Frost covered the walls in thick layers, the floor slick with ice that made every step treacherous. The entity had been through here, had moved through the building's corridors, spreading cold in its wake, transforming JPL from a place of learning and discovery into an alien environment where humans couldn't survive. They moved in a tight group, staying close to the emergency lights, where the heat from the bulbs kept the temperature slightly warmer. The building felt wrong now. The familiar corridors transformed into something hostile and threatening. They passed bodies frozen in the hallways, colleagues and friends caught in the entity's initial spread through the facility. Nathan recognized some of them, people he'd worked with during his week at JPL, people who'd been excited about the mission and eager to share their discoveries, all dead now, all casualties of first contact gone wrong. The server farm was ahead, its doors hanging open, damaged by the entity's passage or deliberately left that way. Beyond, Nathan could see the massive racks of computers that processed Voyager's data, translated signals from the edge of the solar system into images and readings humans could understand, turned electromagnetic radiation into knowledge and discovery. The lights inside were mostly dark, only a few emergency systems still running, but the cold coming out of that room was palpable, a wave of freezing air that made everyone instinctively pull back. And moving between the servers, flowing from machine to machine like liquid shadow, was the entity. It had grown since the control room, fed by the cold and the electrical current that powered the facility, spreading through the building's infrastructure like cancer through a body. It was bigger now, more substantial, more dangerous, and it was patrolling, circling the server racks in a regular pattern that suggested intelligence and purpose. "We can't get through that," someone said behind Nathan, their voice thin with fear. "We have to find another route. There has to be another way to environmental control." "There is no other route," Stone replied quietly. "Environmental control is on the other side of this room. We go through or we die here. Those are our only options." Nathan studied the entity's movement pattern, watching it flow between the servers with hypnotic grace. It was patrolling, definitely patrolling, circling something. He traced its path mentally, figured out what it was protecting. The main data terminal, the direct uplink to the deep space network, the connection to Voyager, 2 billion S of miles away. It doesn't want us to shut down the connection, Nathan realized, the pieces falling into place. It's keeping the pathway open so more of them can come through. This isn't just one entity. It's the first of an invasion force. For more of them, Patricia said, her voice hollow with dread. It's calling reinforcements. If more entities can manifest through the data stream, JPL will be overrun in hours. The whole facility will become a beachhead, for them, a foothold on Earth. That changed everything, transformed this from a containment problem into an existential threat. If more of these beings could reach Earth through data connections, if they could travel as information and emerge anywhere with electricity and cold, then nowhere would be safe. Every computer, every communication system, every piece of technology would be a potential invasion point. New plan, Nathan said, his mind racing through possibilities. We split up. Half of us draw the entity away from the terminals, lead it away from the server farm. The other half reaches environmental control and starts heating this place until the walls melt. We make it too hot for anything from Neptune to survive. That's suicide, one of the engineers protested, his voice shaking. Whoever acts as bait won't make it. That thing is too fast, too cold. It'll kill anyone who gets close. Staying here is suicide, Nathan countered. At least this way some of us might survive. At least we stop more of them from coming through. This isn't just about us anymore. This is about Earth, about making sure these things don't get a permanent foothold on our world. Stone nodded slowly, his face grim but determined. I'll lead the environmental team. Commander, you handle the distraction. You have military training. You're better suited for the dangerous role. They divided the group quickly. No time for long goodbyes or emotional farewells. 10 people would go with Stone, taking the side corridors that wound around the server farm toward environmental control. 9 would stay with Nathan to draw the entity's attention, to make themselves targets, to buy time with their lives. The odds weren't good for either group. Survival was far from guaranteed, but at least they were doing something. At least they were fighting back. Give us 2 minutes to get in position, Stone said, gripping Nathan's shoulder briefly. Then make as much noise as possible. Draw it away from the servers and keep it busy as long as you can. Nathan watched them go, Stone leading his team into the shadowy corridors that would take them around the server farm. 2 minutes. He counted the seconds, watching the entity patrol between the racks, watching it flow past the main terminal over and over in an endless loop. When time was up, he made eye contact with his team, saw fear in their faces but also determination, the human refusal to go quietly into the night. Flashlights on, noise on, make it look at us. They activated every light they had, began shouting and banging on metal surfaces with tools, creating a cacophony that echoed through the corridors. The entity reacted immediately, its patrol pattern disrupting, its form flowing toward the sound and heat like iron filings to a magnet. It moved faster than Nathan had seen before, covering ground with impossible speed, tendrils reaching out from its main mass, seeking to touch and freeze whatever made the noise. Back! Fall back down the corridor! Nathan led the retreat, the team running back the way they'd come, away from the server farm. Behind them, the entity pursued with single-minded focus, abandoning its guard position to chase the warm-blooded prey that had disturbed its vigil. It flowed up walls and across ceilings, moving in 3 dimensions like gravity, meant nothing to it, like the laws of physics were suggestions rather than rules. One of the engineers wasn't fast enough, her feet slipping on the icy floor. The entity caught her ankle before Nathan could reach her, and the freeze spread instantly up her leg. She went down, screaming, clawing at the floor, trying to pull herself free. Nathan turned back, grabbed her outstretched hand, tried to drag her away from the spreading ice, but the freeze reached her chest and torso, her screams cut off as her lungs crystallized, her hand going rigid in Nathan's grip. "Go, don't let it take you too," she managed to gasp with her last breath, and then she was gone. Another victim, another name to add to the list of the dead. Nathan had no choice but to release her and run, the entity flowing past her frozen body in pursuit of warmer prey. The team was running out a corridor, the hallway dead-ending at a stairwell that led up toward the higher floors. There was nowhere else to go, no other direction to run. "Up! Keep moving up the stairs!" Nathan shouted, taking them 3 at a time despite his injured legs. Behind him, the entity flowed upward in pursuit, not needing stairs or handholds, simply rising through the stairwell like smoke. It didn't need gravity, didn't need physical support, could move in ways that made Nathan's brain hurt trying to process. They climbed desperately, 4th floor, 5th floor, 6th, legs burning with exhaustion, lungs screaming for air. The entity was right behind them, close enough that Nathan could feel the cold radiating from its mass, close enough that frost was forming on the back of his neck. They were running out of building, running out of options, running out of time. Then the heat hit like a physical wall, a wave of warmth sweeping down from above. The entity recoiled instantly, pulled back down the stairwell, unable to tolerate the rising temperature. Nathan understood immediately, felt hope surge through his exhaustion. Stone had done it. His team had reached environmental control and activated the heating systems, pumping hot air through the ventilation network, raising the temperature throughout the facility. The building groaned as temperatures fluctuated wildly, thermal expansion and contraction stressing the structure. Ice on the walls began to sublimate, turning directly to water vapor without passing through liquid phase, filling the air with mist. The entity was retreating now, seeking cold zones, but there were fewer and fewer places to hide as the heat spread through JPL's corridors and rooms. Nathan's radio crackled, Stone's voice strained but alive. "Commander, we're at environmental control. Temperature readings show 110 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the primary structure and climbing. The entity is contained in the basement server farm, but we can't push it any further without risking structural damage to the building." "Then we seal it in," Nathan replied, his mind working through the options. "Collapse the stairwells, cut off all access, trap it down there until we can figure out how to destroy it permanently. That means destroying the data connection to Voyager. We'll lose the spacecraft, lose all communication, everything we've worked for." Nathan thought about the creature waiting near Neptune, the one they'd been communicating with before this disaster started. The one that had asked if humanity could learn, if we could be better than our first violent impulse. If they cut the connection now, sealed off the pathway, they'd never be able to answer that question, never be able to apologize or explain or try to make things right. But if they left it open, more entities would come through. Earth would be invaded by something humanity had no defense against, something that could spread through our technology and kill us in our homes and offices, something that lived in cold we couldn't tolerate and fed on energy we needed to survive. There was no good choice, no option that didn't involve loss and sacrifice and the end of something precious. But there was a choice that might save Earth, that might prevent this from spreading beyond JPL's walls. "Do it," Nathan said, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision. "Cut the connection, bring down the server room. End this before more of them come through." "Understood. You should evacuate the building. Once we trigger the collapse, we have maybe 5 minutes before the whole structure becomes unstable. Get out while you can." The radio went silent. Nathan looked at the 5 survivors with him. People who'd followed his orders into hell and somehow made it out alive. "Move, now. Get to ground level and out the emergency exits as fast as you can." They ran again, this time towards safety rather than away from death. Down the stairs they'd just climbed, through corridors that were sauna hot now, past bodies of people who'd died in the cold. The building shook around them as Stone's team began the demolition, controlled explosives designed for emergency scenarios detonating in carefully timed sequences. The sound was deafening, concrete and steel giving way, tons of material falling into the sub-levels in a roar that Nathan felt in his chest. And somewhere in that destruction, buried under collapsed walls and crushed equipment, the entity from Neptune was being trapped, sealed away from the surface, cut off from its connection to Voyager and the reinforcements it had been calling, but not destroyed. Nathan knew with certainty. You couldn't kill something that existed as both matter and information. Something that could flow like liquid and think like a mind. You could only contain it, seal it away, hope it couldn't escape. Nathan reached the ground floor as the first major collapse occurred, the entire eastern wing of the research building coming down in a cascade of debris. The emergency exits were ahead, daylight visible through glass doors that had been blown open by the pressure wave. Outside, military vehicles surrounded the building, soldiers in hazmat suits establishing a perimeter, weapons raised and ready. Nathan burst through the doors into morning sun, into air that felt cool and fresh after the artificial heat of the building. August 26th, 1989, 3 o'clock in the morning. He'd been fighting for his life for almost 7 hours, though it felt like years, like a lifetime compressed into a single endless night. Behind him, JPL's main research building groaned and partially collapsed, the basement levels imploding, raising a cloud of dust and debris that spread across the parking lot. Somewhere in that ruin were 28 frozen bodies, 28 people who died because Nathan had followed orders, because he'd fired a laser at something he didn't understand. 28 names he'd carry with him for the rest of his life, 28 faces he'd see in his dreams. He collapsed on the grass, letting the medics swarm around him, checking vital signs, treating his frost-burned legs, wrapping him in thermal blankets. But his mind was elsewhere, millions of miles away, thinking about the creature near Neptune that had asked if humanity could learn. They'd cut the connection before he could answer, sealed the pathway before he could try to apologize or explain. Now that being would never know if we'd learned anything, would never know if the violence had been fear or malice, would never understand that some of us wanted peace, even if our leaders chose war. Stone emerged from the building, supported by Patricia and 2 others from his team. He looked ancient now, decades older than the excited scientist Nathan had met a week ago. The weight of command, of impossible choices, of survival when others had died, had taken its toll in visible ways. He met Nathan's eyes across the parking lot, and no words were needed. They both understood what they'd lost, what they'd sacrificed, what they'd done to themselves and to humanity's future. Admiral Peterson arrived as the sun rose over Pasadena, casting long shadows across the parking lot. He surveyed the damage with cold military efficiency, taking in the collapsed building, the survivors being treated, the body bags being filled with frozen remains. "The entity is contained?" he asked Nathan without preamble or sympathy. "Buried in the basement, not destroyed. I don't think it can be destroyed in any conventional sense. Good enough for now. We'll study it, learn from it, figure out how to weaponize it or defend against it. Turn this disaster into an intelligence advantage." Peterson's tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing a training exercise rather than the deaths of 28 people. Nathan wanted to hit him, wanted to scream that this wasn't about military advantage or weapons development or gaining leverage over potential enemies. This was about life, about an intelligence that had existed for millions of years, before humanity learned to walk upright, about beings that had their own culture and society and right to exist. But he was tired, too tired to argue, too tired to fight against the system that had created this disaster. "What about Voyager?" Stone asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. "The spacecraft is still out there, still transmitting on its remaining systems." "The connection has been severed from this end," Peterson replied with bureaucratic precision. "We've established new receiving stations at classified locations across the country." The mission continues, but all data will be routed through military channels from now on. No more civilian access. That's not how science works, Stone said, and there was anger in his voice now, energy returning as he faced the destruction of everything he'd worked for. That's not how any of this is supposed to work. Science requires openness, peer review, public access to data. You can't just classify an entire mission. It's how this science works now, Peterson countered coldly. The Neptune encounter revealed the existence of potentially hostile alien life in our solar system. That's a national security issue, not a matter for public consumption. The official story is equipment malfunction at JPL. Tragic accident. Heroic evacuation. The public gets edited data only, sanitized images. Nothing that suggests we made contact with anything unusual. Stone's hands clenched into fists at his sides. You can't just bury first contact. People have a right to know there's intelligent life out there, that we're not alone in the universe. They have a right to know what we found and what we did. People have a right to sleep safely at night without nightmares about alien invasions, Peterson shot back. Imagine the panic if they knew there were organisms in Neptune's atmosphere that can travel through radio waves and manifest on Earth, that can kill with a touch, that might decide humanity is a threat worth eliminating. We'd have mass hysteria, economic collapse, maybe the complete breakdown of society. They weren't hostile until we made them hostile. Stone's voice rose to a shout. We attacked first. We killed their child. Everything that happened here is our fault, our responsibility. That's a matter of perspective, Doctor, Peterson said, his expression unchanging. From where I stand, we defended Earth from an unknown threat. We tested that threat's capabilities and confirmed that it could reach our world. We've now contained a sample for study. We did our job, however messy the execution. He turned to Nathan before Stone could respond. Commander, you and the other survivors will be debriefed over the next 72 hours, then placed under permanent non-disclosure agreements. Everything you saw, everything you experienced, everything you know about the Neptune encounter is classified at the highest levels. This incident never happened. The entity never manifested. The deaths were caused by an industrial accident. Is that perfectly clear? Nathan nodded slowly, too exhausted to resist. Yes, sir. Good. You'll receive commendations for your actions today, classified of course, but meaningful nonetheless. You showed leadership under impossible circumstances, and you saved lives. That matters, Commander, even if the whole truth can never be made public. Peterson started to leave, then paused, something almost human crossing his face briefly. For what it's worth, you did well. You kept your head when things went to hell, and you made the hard choices. That's all any of us can do. Small comfort, Nathan thought as the Admiral walked away. 28 people had died. First contact had ended in violence and death. Humanity's greatest moment of discovery had been buried in classification and lies. And somewhere near Neptune, an alien intelligence waited for an answer that would never come, would draw its own conclusions about what kind of species humanity was. Patricia sat down beside Nathan on the grass, her lab coat torn and stained, her face smudged with soot. What do we do now? Survive, I guess. Try to live with what we know. Carry the weight of the truth, even if we can never share it. Nathan looked up at the morning sky. Pale blue with scattered clouds. Beautiful and normal. As if the universe hadn't just changed forever. And hoped that someday, somehow, we get a second chance to do this right. And the creatures near Neptune, the one we were talking to? Nathan thought about that massive being hovering in the storms, waiting for a response to its question. We left it on red. We cut the connection without answering. They'll think we're hostile, or uncaring, or both. They'll remember that we killed their child and then refuse to communicate. Maybe that's what we are, Patricia said quietly. Maybe that's what we deserve to be remembered as. Maybe. They sat in silence, watching the sun climb higher, watching the military clean up the evidence, watching the official narrative being constructed in real time. By tomorrow, the news would report a tragic accident at JPL, a gas leak that had caused an explosion and partial collapse. Heroic scientists and engineers evacuating under impossible conditions. 28 casualties, including the beloved project scientist Dr. Edward C. Stone, who died trying to save his team. Except Stone wasn't dead. He sat 50 feet away, being examined by medics, very much alive, looking shell-shocked but breathing. They're going to declare him dead anyway, Nathan realized with slowly dawning horror. Make him disappear into the classified world. He knows too much, saw too much. They'll keep him locked away somewhere, let him continue his research, but never let him share it with anyone who matters. Patricia nodded slowly. They'll do the same to all of us, won't they? New identities, new lives, sworn to silence forever. We'll be ghosts, officially dead or reassigned to positions where we can never talk about what we saw. That's how it works, Nathan confirmed. That's how secrets stay secret. You make the witnesses disappear. I hate that you're right. So did Nathan. He hated all of it. Hated the necessity of silence. Hated the weight of knowledge that could never be shared. Hated that humanity's first contact with alien intelligence had gone so catastrophically wrong, and nobody would ever know why or how or what might have been different. The sun climbed higher, morning becoming afternoon. Emergency services arrived, fire trucks and ambulances that weren't really needed anymore. There for show, for the official story. News crews were setting up at the perimeter, preparing to report on the tragic accident, interviewing witnesses who'd been far enough away to see the explosion but close enough to make good television. And in the ruins of JPL's research building, buried under tons of concrete and steel, something from Neptune waited in the cold darkness, patient and alien and utterly beyond human understanding. Trapped but alive, sealed but aware, waiting for an opportunity that might never come, or might come tomorrow, or might come in 100 years when humanity had forgotten the danger and let down its guard. First contact had ended in disaster. 28 people dead, an alien child killed, a species that might have been friends turned into enemies, all because humanity saw the unknown and reached for weapons instead of words. But it had only just begun. The entity was contained, not destroyed. Voyager 2 still transmitted data from the edge of the solar system. The creatures near Neptune still existed, still remembered, still waited to see if the violent species from the inner worlds would return. And somewhere in classified facilities across America, people were studying what had happened, preparing for the next encounter, deciding whether to approach it with peace or prepare for war. The answer to that question would determine humanity's future among the stars. Whether we could join a community of intelligent species as equals and partners, or whether we were doomed to be the violent newcomers, the species that shot first and never bothered with questions, the civilization that brought death wherever we went. 35 years later, Nathan Cross would break his silence and tell the world what really happened at JPL. In August 1989. By then, he'd be 71 years old, haunted by decades of nightmares, carrying guilt that had aged him beyond his years. He'd publish Ed Stone's research on peaceful contact protocols, would reveal the truth about Voyager's hidden laser, would expose the military's role in turning discovery into disaster. Most people wouldn't believe him. Conspiracy theory, they'd say. The ravings of a confused old man. But some would listen, would ask questions, would demand transparency, and maybe, just maybe, when humanity returned to Neptune in 2031, we'd do it right. We'd remember the cost of violence, remember the child we killed, remember that first contact is a moment that defines a species forever. But that was years in the future. For now, on this August morning in 1989, Nathan Cross sat in the grass outside a ruined building and watched the sun rise over a world that had changed forever, even if only a handful of people would ever know it. He thought about the creature near Neptune, alone in the storms, grieving for its child, wondering why the visitors had brought death. He thought about the question it had asked, transmitted across billions of miles with desperate hope. Can you learn? Can you be better? Nathan didn't know the answer, but he knew humanity would get another chance to find out. The universe was patient. The stars would wait. And when we returned to Neptune's realm, we'd discover whether we'd learned anything from our first disastrous contact. Whether we'd chosen peace or prepared for war. Whether we'd become wise or remained violent. Whether we deserved to join the community of intelligent species or deserved to be feared and shunned as the murderers who killed a child and never apologized. The sun rose higher. The morning became afternoon. And billions of miles away, near a blue planet humans had barely begun to understand, an ancient intelligence waited for an answer that would take decades to arrive. If it ever came at all.